Water is a basic need for all forms of life and is all around us. As a shore community bordered by 2 rivers, water is a large part of Groton's identity. Clean Waterways is a new show airing 3 times a year to promote healthy water quality. Here with us today is Nicole Davis from Save the Sound to talk to us about all things water. Nicole, thanks for joining us. Tell us about Save the Sound and how it started.
Thanks, Lauren. Save the Sound is it's an environmental leader in climate change, water protection, and advocacy across the Long Island Sound region, which includes Connecticut, Rhode Island, Westchester County, and Long Island. It started as 3 separate organizations back in the 70s, actually. Connecticut Fund for the Environment was a letter writing campaign around clean water laws and advocacy, focusing on holding people accountable for the laws that weren't necessarily being enforced. Around the same time, Save the Sound formed as more of a stewardship arm, looking at projects and engaging people to protect their local waterways. And then in the 80s, Terry Backer, working with the Waterkeeper Alliance, started the Sound Keeper, which was actually a kind of in the water on Long Island Sound effort to kind of make people aware that their actions impacted the water. And then in the early 2000s, Save the Sound and Connecticut Fund for the Environment merged and became Connecticut Fund for the Environment Save the Sound. The Soundkeeper also joined under the same umbrella, and they unified under one name in 2020 as just Save the Sound.
Wow, so for over 50 years they've been doing this. And there's been a lot of evolution, clearly. So from then to now, what are today's goals for Save the Sound?
So today, the missions really are the same. We still have that kind of legal advocacy arm. We work on climate change and climate policy and really working to amplify stewardship in people's voices and how they can be heard by their local representatives. We also do water quality monitoring, which is looking at actual data and finding problem areas where there's still pollution going into the sound, and then use that as leverage to actually fix the problem, either through legislation or lawsuits, or even working at the state and federal level to get things changed. We also have a lands protection program where we find swaths of precious habitat that really can't be recreated, and work with citizen campaigns to protect those lands from development. And then there's the Ecological Restoration Program, who does on-the-ground projects, focusing on green infrastructure and dam removal and habitat restoration, that's really kind of trying to mitigate the damage that we've done to the environment.
That's heavy. How long have you been with Save the Sound, and what is your role with the organization?
I've been with Save the Sound for 3 years now. I'm the Watershed coordinator, which is really just kind of this amorphic title. So I work in all sorts of things, primarily with the Ecological Restoration team, really focused on connecting people to their waters. So I do a lot of watershed planning, which is where we take kind of these groups and bring them together that are all working around a single water body, and help them kind of prioritize ideas and work together towards that same common goal. And then the other part of my job, which is really great, is implementing those plans. So taking these ideas and priorities and turning them into actions and things that we can actually do on the ground. And I do a lot of outreach with citizens groups and student groups, really trying to promote stewardship. And I really feel like the most important thing you can do to get people to care about their environment is to get their hands dirty and their feet wet and really get them out there to experience what nature is.
What drew you to Save the Sound?
I have an environmental science and water quality background, so I started working in marine conservation with sea turtles. And working with sea turtles, protecting endangered species is such important work, but as you looked at the data and you looked at the problems, it was really people that were causing most of the problems for our environment and not really thinking about how we are connected to the environment. And so I started working with a local planning agency as a regional planner and developing watershed plans to kind of help concentrate those efforts. And then Save the Sound was doing a watershed plan in New Haven, was looking for someone to do just that specific project. So it was a great opportunity to really work with a local community on one discrete project, and then the job kind of grew from there. There's several other watersheds throughout Connecticut that we've been active in from planning on through implementation. So being able to take those projects, from the idea of a concept to something on the ground. And Save the Sound is really, they're great at doing what they say they're going to do. It's a really fantastic team of people dedicated to what they're doing.
That's awesome. We really need people like that in our community. So now we're going to move into water. What are the four types of water and how are they different?
That's a great question. So there's four types of water, and although they're four distinct types, they're all linked. And I think that's going to be a common theme as we talk, that there is this linkage with water. Surface and groundwater are really the two natural types of water. So you've got surface water behind us, which is what we see, and what you can actually watch and see in your backyard. And then there's groundwater. So when water hits the ground and soaks into the ground, water's stored in all those little spaces between soils and rocks and particles, which is also really important to an ecosystem. And it feeds into surface water in most cases. And then there's also stormwater, which is rain. And normally, or not normally, but naturally, rain would just fall and infiltrate in the ground or slowly move its way into rivers. But in the built environment, we have runoff. So stormwater is now something that hits the ground and doesn't always have somewhere to go. So it's something that's managed by people. And then there's wastewater, which is what comes out of our house. So it's anything that goes down your sink or gets flushed into a toilet and it goes to a treatment plant. So it's clean before it's returned to nature.
What is considered drinking water and where does that come from?
Drinking water is a whole different ballpark. So drinking water is any water that's cleaned or made potable for human consumption. And that's heavily regulated by the State Department of Health. So I can talk to you a little bit about that, but I was going to say I defer to the experts on all things drinking water. But it's really anything that's been treated. So anything that's delivered to your house, either through groundwater, wells, which is something that's present in a lot of Connecticut, or public water supply, which comes to pipes to people's houses.
And how is that water purified?
It's a really complicated process. The simplest way to think about it is it's filtered. So it kind of goes through a membrane that takes out large particles and small particles and anything that'll fit, through a screen or a sieve. And then from there, it's purified either using light or UV or chemicals like chlorine that kind of take out any potentially harmful bacteria. And even something as simple as boiling can be done. And again, that's all regulated by the state, and the water companies are really good at reporting that and staying on top of it.
Now, you had mentioned earlier about the work with watersheds. What exactly is a watershed?
That is my favorite question. A watershed is really any area of land that drains to a body of water. So it's where a raindrop falls and where it eventually ends. So streams and rivers and lakes and oceans have watersheds, but even something as simple as a puddle has a watershed. So it's any area of land that drains to a central water body.
Why are watersheds important?
They're really important because water is what connects us, and it doesn't necessarily adhere to political boundaries. So most rivers and streams run through multiple towns and communities and neighborhoods. So thinking about things in that larger watershed scale really helps to think about what the ultimate impacts of what things are and how we're connected.
So it's so important then, city by city, town by town, to really be united in that front to keep those watersheds healthy.
Exactly. And especially, just to add to that too, when you're thinking about communities and kind of where Groton lies in a watershed, you're a downstream community. So really being concerned about what's happening upstream makes a huge difference, because you can have the best regulations and do the best work possible to clean the river, but if communities upstream of you are dumping things in the ground or not really paying attention to what they're doing, it still impacts what happens to you.
So we really have to be looking at the bigger picture. How do the watersheds provide filtration?
So naturally, watersheds are designed to soak up the water. Some water would go through vegetated areas and kind of make its way to the river and streams, or go into the groundwater where soils and roots filter out that water before they make their way into either groundwater or into the surface water through underwater seepage. So kind of this connectivity of wetlands and rivers and streams and land is what helps clean the water and kind of take any contaminants or things that might be in it out before it hits our rivers, streams, and oceans.
Besides that filtration, what are some other functions of a watershed?
Natural watersheds also have tremendous storage abilities. Watersheds really are, an undeveloped watershed is kind of a perfect system. Like, it's designed to not be overwhelmed and to slow water before it enters it. And so there's areas like floodplains, which you can even see kind of how we're connected to the water behind us, where water could naturally come up and not necessarily have an impact downstream. So kind of storing excess water and filtering it and creating habitat are really important functions of a watershed.
How do watersheds affect Long Island Sound?
That same idea is kind of filtering and slowing water. So all those big storms that we've had over the past couple months and those big rain events have really kind of showcased the importance of conveying water and how it makes it to the sound. So in a watershed, filtering out even things like sand and dirt and sediments before it makes it to the river is really important. And rivers and streams are designed to kind of naturally move water and move sediment around, but also to retain things so they're not getting washed out in the storm. So they carry everything from upstream and land out into Long Island Sound, which is ultimately connected to the Atlantic Ocean.
So they have their own things that they do, a lot of important work, and what we're doing into our environment isn't helping that cause. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to find out how we can affect our watersheds.
EPA's How's My Waterway lets you learn about the health of your local waters anytime and anywhere. Before heading outdoors, use this tool to find out whether your favorite water body is safe for fishing or swimming. You can also learn about the drinking water in your community and get more information about water quality at the state and even the national level. Whether sitting at home or on the go, How's My Waterway works seamlessly on desktop computers, tablets, and mobile phones. Explore your waterways today.
Welcome back. I'm here with Nicole Davis from Save the Sound. In our first segment, we talked about Save the Sound, water, types of water, and what a watershed is. But Nicole, with that watershed, how do human activities affect it?
It's a good question. As I mentioned before, a watershed, a natural watershed, is really kind of this perfect system that's meant to filter and have water move in kind of a slow and controlled fashion so that we don't overwhelm our water bodies. And with development, we've changed and altered that a lot. Water for a long time wasn't valued. It was really just viewed as something that takes garbage and waste and things we don't want away. You would dump it in the water and it would wash away with the next rainstorm, and so no one really thought much about it. And as we've kind of evolved as humanity and had a better understanding of our ecosystems, we start to realize that what we put in the water does go somewhere. But on top of that too, development has made a big impact. Impervious surfaces, which are anything paved, roads, roofs, driveways, all kind of keep water from infiltrating naturally and keep it out of the groundwater, and also force it to flow into rivers and streams faster. And so we've had to develop systems like stormwater systems to kind of help move that water off our roads and safely, take it away from where we're living, which then creates these kind of inputs of water all along the coast that can have detrimental impacts. And it really takes anything that we put on land and puts it directly into our waterways.
Now, I know we have development here in Groton, and there's a lot of review that goes into each development process to make sure that the least impact is happening, as well as our inland wetland agency that looks at the mitigation measures. So I think as long as each town does their job, it's okay for development. It's just minimal impact and what we can do to work around that.
Exactly it. It's about thinking about development too, and kind of making sure that when a development does go in, it's not clearing all the way to the water, that there's still that kind of buffer and that stormwater is still given a chance to infiltrate into the ground naturally. It's just smart development, not necessarily no development.
So how do we know if there's been any harm to our watershed, drinking water, or Long Island Sound? What's the measure for that?
So water quality is something that's monitored pretty regularly. The state has water quality monitoring programs. The departments of public health measure water quality, especially at beaches and places where people recreate. And then Save the Sound has a unified water study that uses citizen science or community-based science to help measure embayments around all sides of Long Island Sound, looking at trends. and kind of keeping a track on, the level of nutrients and bacteria in the water. There's things that occur naturally, but there's also times like after storms where a lot is washed into the water and there's elevated levels. And by keeping a tab on that too, we can also track, if there is a problem, if all of a sudden we see a spike in bacteria or nutrients, that means it's coming from somewhere. And so trying to figure out where it's coming from and stop before it becomes a big problem. We also maintain something called the Sound Health Explorer, which is a website produced by Save the Sound that looks at water quality across all of the coastline of New York and Long Island and Connecticut.
Now, I know you said that they test the water. I hear frequently when beaches are closed and you can't swim. How often do they test that, or is there a trigger that makes them go in and test?
It's something that's done by the Department of Public Health or the local health departments, and I believe they're tested weekly. And then I think they're tested more frequently after a large rainstorm, just to make sure that there aren't any elevated levels of bacteria to worry about.
How do you identify the extent of water pollution on a watershed, drinking water, or the sound?
Really long-term monitoring data is the key thing. I mean, besides just looking at water quality measures, you can look at, the animals that are living in the sound and around the sound and how they're faring. Things like whales used to be hugely prevalent in Long Island Sound, and dolphins. And as these species start to come back and bigger fish start to come back, that also means that the smaller species, the macroinvertebrates and the plankton and the small bait fish are starting to do better too, which really is directly related to water quality. There's also state standards for water quality, even for surface water and groundwater. And so the state regularly monitors that, and they publish a list every 2 years of water bodies not meeting those standards.
So you said we used to have the dolphins and the whales in the sound, and I know now it's not as often that we see, but are we seeing a comeback in those things?
There's starting to be a comeback of some things. I've heard rumor that there's a couple pods of dolphins in the sound this summer, and really, I mean, there's so much interlinkage between what's going on. Some of it is water quality based, some of it has to do with overfishing or taking away, the bait fish, and how the water's changing with climate changes.
So it's evident, but why do we need to protect our watersheds?
It's really simple. Without clean water, we can't survive. We need clean drinking water just as a species. But beyond that, even the small things in the ecosystems, like the insects and the birds and the pollinators and the fish, play such an important role on everything, providing food sources for the animals that we eat, or even the food that we eat that does come from the ocean. So making sure that it's clean and that we have the resource that we need.
How does Save the Sound and other groups' land preservation efforts assist in keeping our waters clean?
So most of our major land programs are based on, large patches of land that, if developed or destroyed, really couldn't be recreated. There's a lot of, nature-based solutions that we can do to help mitigate the impact of developments, but these large stands of forest, or even protecting Plum Island is another big one that we're part of, that once those ecosystems are lost, they can't be recreated. So Save the Sound, whenever we go on a major lands campaign, we always work with a coalition of stakeholders. So it's something that usually happens from the ground up. So it's not just Save the Sound working to protect these lands, but it's local groups and people with interest in both the environment, and sometimes it's even just because that's their favorite hiking spot that they don't want to go away. And so kind of having that community commitment to protecting the lands can make a big difference.
And we already stated it's not just where there's the most water. We need to work with those groups that are outside of our area.
Exactly.
What can we do at home or work to protect our watersheds, like in our day-to-day?
There's a lot of really basic things that people can do to protect our watersheds. And I mean, one of the simplest one is to pay attention to what you put on the ground. I mean, don't litter. It seems really obvious, but I mean, we do coastal cleanups every year and pick up tons of trash because people are littering or dropping things on the ground or dumping things in storm drains. I mean, I'm making sure that you're disposing of oil and gas properly, not dumping it on the ground or even worse in a storm drain. And even things like being an advocate locally, talking to your friends and neighbors when you see something or about why it's important to protect water quality, and paying attention to kind of local regulations and advocating for things that, would protect groundwater and stormwater and our communities. And then there's bigger things that can have a big impact even though they're just a little bit of work, like installing rain gardens on your property to capture your stormwater before it runs off, and maintaining buffers, along our rivers and streams. So there's a little bit of vegetation to protect the water and clean it before it hits the groundwater or before it hits the surface water. And then also, it's something that sounds silly, but not dumping yard waste into rivers and streams, which is something that's still a common occurrence in a lot of communities.
Wow, so there's plenty that we can do, and it's not too late. Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today and providing such valuable information on drinking water, watersheds, and Save the Sound. Next, we're going to go to a segment with Jessica Patterson and her young friends called What Are You Talking About?
Hi, I'm Jessica Patterson with What Are You Talking About? Today we are going to learn what our young friends know about water. And remember, there's no wrong answer, so you answer what very first thing comes to your mind, that's what we want to hear. Where does drinking water come from?
A faucet.
Cups. Cups.
What happens to water when you flush the toilet?
Go down the drain.
It goes down.
You go down. There's a puzzle and pipes and maze and then I don't know.
How can we help protect water and keep it clean?
Clean the water.
They clean the water. Not littering.
Who loves water? Good job! High fives all around. Superstars, superstars. One more? Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed today's program. Thank you again to Nicole Davis from Save the Sound for joining us and providing all that information. If you want more information on what you can do at home to help our environment, visit savethesound.org. Thanks again for watching. We hope you join us soon.
Save the Sound, a proud partner of this program, leads environmental action in your region by fighting climate change, saving endangered lands, protecting the Sound and its rivers, and working with nature to restore ecosystems.